Hey guys, David at First Place Auto Parts. I really appreciate you joining me in the studio today. You know, there's a lot of parts that we sell at First Place Auto Parts that are performance and restoration oriented, but the performance stuff is what really gets me excited. Look, I like to go fast, and I like my vehicles, if it's a truck, to pull hard, and I'm pretty sure you guys are no different. Look, who wants the same when we can be different? Performance parts give you that opportunity, but did you know that there's some performance parts that are sold that don't always advertise necessarily the horsepower that they are shown to deliver? The reality is the parts that we're going to talk about in today's video need other things to make horsepower. Yes, they can help in the combination, but by themselves are not going to add horsepower, and you might be surprised by a couple of them. Look, of the two items that I have on my worktop right here, the carburetor and the race fuel, one of these is not going to add horsepower by itself. At the end of the video, I'm going to tell you what it is, so make sure you stay tuned. But today we're talking about performance parts that you can probably skip if all you're looking to do is bolt them on specifically and add performance to your car, because it just isn't going to happen. So guys, stay tuned today. We're going to take a look at parts that you can skip when it comes time to adding horsepower by themselves. Hey guys, if you like today's video, please consider subscribing to the First Place Auto Parts YouTube channel. We're going to continually be adding new videos every week where we show you how to put new parts on. We take a look at the latest parts that are available, and we go to some pretty cool car guy stuff I'm pretty sure you're going to want to see. To understand how you add horsepower, the first thing that we have to know about an engine is essentially it's a big air pump. I'm sure you heard that before. Making horsepower is all about the combination, which is why it's really hard to find one single item that you can add to a vehicle that just makes raw horsepower. So when it comes time to bolting parts on, the one thing that you have to understand is that ultimately to make power, to increase the power of your existing combination, you need to have some sort of restriction somewhere. There are some definite parts that you can add to a vehicle, like a camshaft or a set of headers, that absolutely will help in the increase, whether it's power or torque. But a lot of the parts that you can simply bolt on that are advertised to add 25 or 35 horsepower, if you're real careful and you look at the marketing, you'll see it says it can add up to 35 or 36 horsepower or whatever it is. And the reality is that means that those parts really are a part of a combination. They're meant to remove a restriction that's in a possible system if you were to add more performance to your car. But the price of some of these parts are such that the bang for the buck just isn't there. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about which parts are on the no-fly zone list, if you will, in regards to simply bolting them on and making your car make more horsepower. Now, one thing I want to make clear in this video is that I'm not going to name names of specific manufacturers or product. Look, they make all these products I'm going to talk about are quality, they're well made. It's just they're not going to add performance by themselves. And the very first item that we're going to talk about, look, they're popular because I see this sticker on the back of a lot of the pickup trucks that I see on the road, and that is the air filter, the gauze type that you oil and can reuse. Look, that type of air filter just doesn't add horsepower to your car unless your air box was restrictive originally. When the original manufacturer designed your air filter size and the air box for your car, what they take into account is the CFM that the engine's going to need under wide open throttle at full demand. If it's a truck, it'd be something like it's pulling a boat. When you're in that pedal for a long time going up a hill and it's at 4,000 RPMs, you've got to have enough airflow or CFM of airflow to support the combustion process to make the power that engine needs. Manufacturers take this into account. Like, they want to build and design the most efficient air box and air filter size as possible. But by going from a paper filter, such as the one I have here, to the gauze oilable type, you're just not removing a restriction. The reality is paper air filters, when they're clean, flow a lot of air. It's just when they get dirty, same thing will happen with a gauze type filter. The oil actually helps catch the dirt. Where a paper filter, you'll just throw away when it's dirty. The gauze type filter you can clean, but the gauze type filter is not going to add horsepower to your car. The second item that we're going to talk about, and we're going to be sticking with the air intake theme, are the actual cold air intakes. Look, a lot of your cold air intakes today have a very long tube that mounts to an open box. It may either seal to the hood or it has some sort of an outlet to the outside of the inner fender well, where in theory it's drawing in colder air. The reality is there's a certain amount of heat soak that takes place from that filter or that cold air box as it travels to the throttle body on your late model vehicles, that it heats the air up. Look, air underneath the hood can get over 200 to 250 degrees. It's hot. And when that hood's closed, everything under that hood gets soaked with heat. It absorbs the heat. So to get a true cold air intake, you would need a very short shot to actual intake the throttle body or the carburetor, such as the old Trans Ams had with the shaker scoops back when they were open, or some of the Ram Air stuff where it was mounted on the hood and the cold air went directly into the air box. But the reality is, your cold air intakes, look, they sound like they're making power because typically you get a large, remember that oilable mesh filter that I talked about earlier, and it's open. So when you hear that throttle body open, it sounds like it's making power. The intake noise is substantially more. As a matter of fact, the OEs go through a lot of work to help quiet that intake noise because it can be so loud. But cold air intakes, for the vast majority of the ones that are made, look, they don't reduce the air intake temperature enough to actually realize an increase in performance. The next performance part that you can go ahead and skip if you're in the search for a single part you're going to just bolt into your engine and make more power is going to be some of your fancy spark plugs. I call them boutique spark plugs. Look, there's some things you can do with your standard spark plugs with the single ground strap to make them more efficient in your combustion chamber. One of the things that I do on my 56 Chevy is I'll actually index the plug. And what that means is I actually make sure that the ground strap is not blocking that intake charge and it's actually opened up. So when this thing lights off, that they call the flame kernel, that explosion when it lights the air and fuel coming into the combustion chamber is unshrouded. But some of the new spark plugs that we have available today, they either have a special strap that has a U made into them. There are even some spark plugs out there that have 2 or 3 different ground straps on them. And the reality is, those by themselves, unless there's really something wrong with the existing spark plugs in your car, maybe the electrodes have worn and the gap's too big or they're fouled. These newfangled, if you will, spark plugs with different ground straps and multiple ground straps just are not gonna add performance to your car. Most of your modern cars, look, they got coilover plugs, meaning if you have an 8-cylinder, you have 8 coils that is focused, single coil focused solely on igniting one spark plug. These new ignitions are very high energy, and if you ever grab the coil wire on an old school spark plug that had a coil, you'll know how much energy those things put out. Those things put out a ton of spark. So unless your existing spark plugs are either worn or fouled, getting a different kind of spark plug with multiple ground straps or a ground strap that has a U shaped into it or some sort of special coating, spark plug itself isn't going to find you more horsepower. And hey, look, don't feel bad if you've bought these parts. I bought them myself and I've tried them and I know from experience that they don't work. But again, I've seen a lot of this stuff tested on various engines in dyno rooms and where I've actually seen with my own eyes whether they did or did not perform as advertised. And again, it's always part of a combination. You've got to think about building horsepower. As I had said earlier, is all the different components come into play. These items that we've talked about so far are about replacing items that are maybe less efficient, and it's possible they could add performance if the original design was maybe substandard or just didn't allow for the ultimate performance. And again, we're talking wide open performance here, right? The next item that we're going to talk about is something that could add performance, but the OEMs have done such a good job for the most part in designing their stock ones that really what you're getting into is just more noise. And that part is simply any of the mufflers that are available. Look, most of your OEMs, they want to make, as I said earlier, as much horsepower as possible with their engines. They want to be able to advertise that. There's always been somewhat of a horsepower war, and the reality is horsepower has always been measured at the brochure, meaning that sometimes manufacturers nudge those figures a little bit, but the reality is they want to design an exhaust system that's not only quiet, that lasts a long time, but that also performs. Look, there have been some OE mufflers on some cars. The 3rd gen cross-flow F-body mufflers come to mind that were terrible in regards to their flow. Or you remember the 1st generation Camaros that you could get the chambered exhaust on? And those chambered exhausts killed horsepower. By removing the mufflers or changing the mufflers out with a performance muffler, typically what you're doing is, yes, you're opening up the opportunity to make more horsepower, but that's only if you freed up the motor and the exhaust system upstream. If you still have restrictive exhaust manifolds or multiple catalytic converters, or you've done nothing to the engine, camshaft, or intake-wise, or compression to make more horsepower, The realities are the mufflers aren't the things that are holding you up at the back of your car. Will it make it sound better? Will it make it sound cooler? Absolutely. If all you're looking for is to increase the, I don't know, the street credibility of your vehicle, look, dude, I dig rumble. I do. I get it. I put Flowmaster mufflers on more of my cars, upset my neighbors and my wife more times than I can count. But the reality is, never did I realize more performance. Mufflers by themselves, they're not going to add horsepower either, guys, just sound. And the final item, and I'm going to answer the question that I kind of posed at the beginning of this, is of which of these two items will not add horsepower, and that is the race fuel. Race fuel or high octane fuel in itself, yes, it'll make your wallet a little lighter, but if your car doesn't need the higher octane, if you're not getting pre-detonation or pinging when you're under wide open throttles or under a load, your car does not need race fuel. Look, it used to be common to go to the track and bump up our ignition timing a little bit and throw a couple of gallons of the good stuff in the tank. We could smell it. Maybe we added a little bit of horsepower, because really what we did is we advanced the timing and the firing, or where that spark plug and that ignition fired that initial mix. We needed the higher octane to help quelch or squelch the actual knocking and pinging that was going to take place. It didn't make horsepower by itself, and some would say that even advancing the timing didn't do much for us either, but we felt like we were doing something, right? But the reality is, your cars, even with the compression ratios that a lot of your late model cars run in the 11.5 to 1 ratio, it really, when you're at an old school muscle car or truck and they were 8.5 or 9 to 1, it really wasn't until you started getting into the 10 and the 11 to 1 compression ratio that you needed a higher octane fuel. Higher octane fuel is interesting in that it actually slows down the burn. You know, people think they're going to put premium or high test gas in their car and it's going to speed up. The reality is, nowadays we have NOx sensors that do a lot of things with the ignition timing, and one of the things that they do when the actual NOx sensor senses that there's a knocking or pinging going on is it retards your timing. So it's doing what you used to do with race gas automatically. Does it reduce your performance? Yeah, it does a little bit when it reduces timing. But unless you are dedicated to spending a premium on race fuel or high octane fuel, 93 plus octane, the reality is this stuff just doesn't add horsepower by itself. In today's video, we've taken a look at some individual components that, when installed individually, do not make power by themselves. They're there to support or enhance additional performance at modifications you may have made to your vehicle, your car, or your truck. The reality is these things all have their place, but by themselves, they're not a silver bullet. You really have to judge the cost versus the benefit ratio. 10 gallons of race fuel or high octane fuel, look, that can cost you up to $10 a gallon. Air filter that can be reused a couple of times or several times and kept clean may have some benefit to you, but really when you buy it under the auspices of, if you will, of adding performance, each one of these items comes up short. But in combination with some other products can absolutely be a benefit. So it really depends on what you've done to your car. Guys, I appreciate you watching this video. At First Place Auto Parts, we have got a ton of restoration performance parts that do work for your car, and you can go there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at fpautoparts.com. I appreciate you watching this video, and stay tuned to our YouTube channel. We're continually adding new videos that shows how to improve, to install modifications to your car to make it look better, go faster, or stop harder. Guys, until next time, keep the hammer down and keep it between the guardrails.